We'll begin in 30 seconds. Give yourself a moment to sit down. We'll begin in 30 seconds. I think I'll now begin. So good evening and welcome everyone to the Planning Committee. Now before we start the meeting, I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. There will be no planned fire alarm test today, and if you hear the fire alarms, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is the St John's Church Yard off Jewett Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you as required. The public toilets are located on the main reception area. There is a refreshment machine for use by members of the public in the waiting area outside this meeting room. Finally, please switch your mobile phone to silence whilst in the meeting room. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Members of the public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. I ask you please be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you're filming the meeting, please do not film the audience. The code for accessing the Council's Wi-Fi, it's capital FR33, capital W, Wi-Fi, IFI, followed by an exclamation mark, for reasons I don't know, but there you are. Now, during the meeting, members of the committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting, send or receive emails, text message or tweets concerning the business of the committee. I will now formally begin the meeting. Item 1, apologies. I do not, there is one apologies, isn't there? I believe there is. Councillor Dan Whitehead, who has been ably substituted by Nick. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Of course, Nick Johnson. I'll get your popular name. Oh, and Councillor as well. I could keep going, couldn't I? I could keep going. Anyway, item 2, confirmation of voting members. Please will voting members of the committee indicate by raising their hands. Please raise your hands. Thank you. Item 3, notification of any item of business which the Chair deems urgent, and as far as I'm aware, there are no additional documents to be circulated at the meeting, and of course you're all now in possession of the usual addendum and members pack. And indeed there are spare copies of these documents, I believe, at the rear of the room, and on the other side as well. Thank you very much indeed. I'll now move on to item 4, disclosure of interest dispensation. Does any member of the committee wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be discussed at this meeting? Are there any declarations?
Yes, Chair, just to say that I'm a resident in Camberwell, that I come to the meeting with completely open and transparency approach to the application. Thank you.
Duly noted, Councillor Soames. Thank you very much. I now move on to item 5. These are minutes of our previous meeting. Does the committee agree to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of June, although there is subject to, I believe, a revision? There was a note in the minutes, and I think maybe the legal officer might want to make a comment, but there's a note in the minutes reference to the Park House application. We agreed to hear it on the 28th of this month, in other words, today. Clearly, this is not happening today, and therefore we need to pass a resolution to amend the minutes.
Yeah, Chair, that's correct. There were just 3 members here at the previous meeting, and Councillors O'Brien and Livingstone will recall that we did specifically refer, it was the Beckett House application, to say that it would be heard tonight on the 28th of June. It's clearly not being heard tonight. It's not on the 6th of July. It assumes will be later in July. So we do need to pass another resolution, assuming the Chair proposes it, to the effect that the Beckett House application will be deferred to a future date. not as yet specified.
I so move that motion as stated. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Can we just vote? Show of hands, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Now, subject to that amendment, are you content that the minutes are an accurate record of our previous meeting? Those who are present. Thank you very much. I'll now move on to item 6. Release of £719,334.87 from Section 106 agreement to increase accessible housing across the borough. And members, these are pages 1 to 11 of the main agenda pack. Can I ask Officer Constituent Report Neil Lobster to introduce as required?
Good evening, Chair. Thank you very much. My name is Neil Lobster. I'm the Planning Officer presenting and advising members of the committee on Sections 106 item 6. This is, as the Chair mentioned, the release of £719,334.87 from 2 legal agreements. The 2 legal agreements relates to one on Blackfriars Road and the other one on Lower Road and Plough Road. The release of this money will affect all wards. However, the money comes from the Borough Maxa and the Rotherhithe ward. The money will be managed by the private sector housing and adaptation team. The £719,000 will help to create approximately 90 additional accessible homes, enabling vulnerable people to continue living independently. This will be managed by the council's in-house building surveyors. All works go through a procurement exercise in line with the council's standing orders. The works will include wet rooms, level access showers, stair lifts, door windings, etc. The 719,000 will be additional to the 1.6 million already committed for the adaptation of these houses. I just want to bring it to the members' attention as well. In 2019-20, Planning Committee agreed 898,000 to help increase the delivery of accessible homes across the borough. This allowed us to help additional 100 residents for the adaptation of their properties. We respectfully request committee to release the money in order to allow an increase in accessible housing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed, Neil. Thank you very much. Are there members require clarifications? I see 2, 3. I'll go down from, forgive me, Councillor Wyndham. I'll start from my left and move to my right. My way. I'll start with Councillor Coldwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. There's a line in the report which I'm only asking about as a clarification, not because I'm sort of doubting the validity of it at all. It's just there's a line that refers to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that has led to an increase in cases of people waiting for urgent adaptations. I just wondered if you could, in a couple of sentences, give us a bit more understanding of what that means in practice, because, I mean, are we talking about people whose health has been made even worse because they themselves have contracted COVID? Is it people who previously had a carer that has had to, you know, move out because they've become ill? What's COVID-19 had to do to make the situation worse?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you.
Chair, unfortunately, I've asked the author of the report and the adaptation manager to join us this evening. Unfortunately, he lives in Colchester, so he wasn't able to come. However, it's my understanding is that there's a large strain on finance at the moment, and this would be additional to the 1.6 million. And I think that COVID-19 might have caused additional strain on finances. However, I'm not 100% sure. That was just my understanding of it.
All right. I didn't expect you to say that, but I'll move on. I'll move on to Councillor Whittam, then followed by Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Williams. Councillor Whittam.
I was just wondering whether we should have
myself and Councillor Williams should have declared an interest because it's in Rotherhithe. It's coming from Rotherhithe. Okay, thank you.
In that case, Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you for your presentation. Just clarification, I'm not against obviously giving money towards adaptions, but can you just clarify for the committee that Section 106 agreements tend to be quite specific, whereas this seems to be a pot of money which is going to be made available to the adaptions team. So legally, those people contributing to these Section 106 contributions, how do they know that this is where their money is actually going? And secondly, it's my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, that Section 106 is supposed to mitigate the disruption of the building for local residents, and I understand that this money is going to be allocated borough-wide, so most of it's coming from Borough and Bankside Ward. How do we justify to Borough and Bankside residents that the Section 106 money isn't being used to mitigate against the inconvenience of construction in their area?
Thank you, Chair. The money that's been allocated in this case is specific from those developments where wheelchair accessible units, the legal agreements required wheelchair accessible units. However, after marketing, those units were not taken up as wheelchair accessible, and the developers had to provide us with a financial contribution. In regards to the Borough and Bankside and the Birmingham or the Rotherhithe, the money is borough-wide. However, there's already 1.6 million given across the board, and we are just topping that up. And we can, if members would like, we can go to our adaptation team and say, listen, those should receive preference in those areas. However, we feel that across the borough there is a need, and this is only additional to the 1.6, and that 1.6 already covers all the wards, and the additional 700 is in order that we could provide more independent living throughout the whole borough.
Thank you for that. I'll bring in the legal officer, John Course.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that in the case of these agreements, they are for the benefit of the borough as a whole. It's most unusual for Section 106 agreements to be borough-specific, and therefore I don't see there's any reason that this would be outside the terms of those agreements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, in that case, if I may, I'd like to move, if there are no Councillor Livingstone.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, no, I wasn't going to ask a question until I heard some things in answer there which sort of made me think a bit. It does feel quite extraordinary that the development in Blackfriars Road, that the developer there thinks it's worth giving the council £657,000 rather than provide wheelchair accessible properties. It does make me think, have we got our measures right here as a council, and maybe can the planning department do some work to look at whether we are charging the right levels here in terms of offsetting, because it feels a lot of money not to have some wheelchair accessible properties in that property, and I accept there's probably not much we can do about this application, but it does suggest we perhaps need to look at our policy a bit harder on this.
I'll hand over to Colin Wilson. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Livingstone.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Lewis. And we can certainly take that away and have a look at that for you. As you say, it's a significant amount of money, but as Neil was explaining, it's kind of post-marketing of the private elements of the developments, but we can have a look at that for you and perhaps do a note for you and follow that up with the Chair and other members of the committee.
And thank you, Councillor Livingstone, for that intervention. Thank you very much. Thank you. If there are no further comments made by the committee, I'd like to move to a motion. I'd like to move that we adopt the officer's recommendation as set out in paragraph 1 of the report on page 6 of the main agenda pack, that the Planning Committee approves the release of £719,334.87 of Section 106 funding from the legal agreement listed in paragraph 1 of the report to increase accessible housing provision across the borough at 128 to 150 Blackfriars Road, SE1, and the land at 247 to 251 Lower Road, and 2 to 8 Plough Way, SE16 2LS. Does any member of the committee wish to second the motion? I've seen Councillor Whittam on this occasion. I'll now move to the vote. I'll call on the voting members of the committee by name and ask them to confirm whether they vote in favour, against, or abstain the motion. I will now begin with Councillor Whittam. Are you for, against, or abstain the motion?
For.
Councillor James Caldwell, for, against, or abstain the motion?
For.
Councillor Richard Livingstone, for, against, or abstain the motion?
For.
Councillor Damien O'Brien, for, against, or abstain the motion?
For.
Councillor Cleo Stones, for, against, or abstain the motion?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Nick Johnson, for, against, or abstain the motion?
For.
And Councillor Bill Williams, for, against, or abstain the motion? And I'm Councillor Martin Seaton, and I'm for the motion. The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Councillor Neil Wellstone. I'll now move to item 7, which is development management. Now, the next item of business concerns the determination of planning applications. I would like to remind everyone of the committee the guidance and conduct of business. Officers will present a report, outline their recommendations, and answer questions raised by the committee. If present wishing to speak, the body may then address the committee for no more than 3 minutes each. A spokesperson representing any objector to the application, and by now you need to identify a single spokesperson. If more than one objector wishes to speak, the time will be divided accordingly within the 3 minutes time slot. They will be followed by the applicant or their agent, a spokesperson, then followed by the spokesperson representing any supporter of the application who live within 100 metres of the development site. And last but not least, of course, the ward councils representing the area affected by the proposals. Ward members in attendance and those nominated to speak on behalf of objectors, supporters and applicants should sit in the front row of the public gallery. This is for ease of communication between the committee and the speakers, in case any issues need to be clarified later in the proceeding. It is, of course, not an opportunity to take part in the debate of the committee. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspect of the proposals and should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. The meeting is not a hearing where all participants present evidence to be cross-examined by other participants. At the end of each representation, the committee may ask questions of the presenter. Speakers should lead the committee on subjects on which they would welcome further questioning. After receiving all submissions, the committee will debate the application and consider the recommendations. This is a council committee meeting which is open to the public, and of course there should be no interruptions or members of the audience. Finally, I would like everyone present to know that although the planning committee comprises members of different political parties, we are not politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and based on the information contained in the relevant reports, together with the consultation responses and any verbal submissions made today. How we approach these applications set out in the development management report in item 5, and if members are happy to note that report, we move on to considering the planning applications. Are you content, members? Thank you very much. In that case, I'll move on to item 7.1. Butterfly Walk Shopping Centre and the land rear at the Denmark Hill, Orpheus Street and Danville Road and Wren Road, Camberwell SE5 8RW. Can I invite the officer to consider the report to begin your presentation? If you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members of the Planning Committee and those attending in person and remotely. My name is Patrick Cronin. I'm the Planning Officer for this application. Perhaps first I'll just start with the addendum. Paragraphs 4 to 7 detail the additional consultation responses from members of the public that have been received in the interim between the publication of the committee report and draft decision notice and today's meeting. Paragraph 5 summarises what those representations are, so 4 in objection, 1 neutral and 1 in support. And then paragraph 7 provides an abridged table of the full consultation reasons table that you'll see in the committee report itself. What it does is it just shows each of the material planning considerations that have been raised by those more recent representations. And then moving on to corrections and clarifications on the main report. The first one to mention is that the agenda report pack, so that's the kind of composite document that pulls together the report, the decision notice, and the appendices, includes an erroneous draft decision notice. That's on pages 233 through to 293. The correct draft decision notice is actually immediately after that. So that's the one to refer to. That's on pages 294 to 377. There wasn't really a great deal of difference except with the correct draft decision notice, it just lists all of the plans. Those were missing from the erroneous ones. And some of the conditions are more concisely worded. And under item 7.1 on the committee webpage, there is a list of 7 documents, including the draft decision notice, and that draft decision notice is the correct version. So hopefully members were aware of that because the addendum was circulated on Friday. Further corrections include to the title block of the committee report, which refers incorrectly to the ward being in Borough and Bankside. The correct ward is Camberwell Green. That's obviously referred to multiple times throughout the report. Secondly, there's a correction to the description of the hotel. In various paragraphs of the report, the proposed hotel is described as containing 101 bedrooms. The hotel would actually contain 102 bedrooms. Next on the corrections, paragraph 579, which deals with socio-economic impacts, contains an error. It should refer to 10 sustained jobs for unemployed Southwark residents. And then moving on to paragraph 14 of the addendum, paragraph 14 and 15. This deals with a correction to the planning obligations summary table. There is one item within that that's listed under transport impacts mitigation. It is a sum to cover the cost of a raised table at the junction of Daneville Road and Wren Road. Those works would still be delivered, but they will now be delivered as part of the Section 278 agreement. Essentially, that requires the developer to deliver those works themselves at their own cost. That's what Section 278 is designed to do. Whereas previously, we've just been taking a local public realm contribution from the developer for that. So instead, what's happening now, and this was at the advice of our Highways Development Management Division, that will be secured for Section 278. Paragraph 16 to 18 address a change to the affordable retail offer. Since the publication of the committee report, the applicant has decided to alter the affordable retail offer. 3 rather than all 6 of the small and independent retailers would be offered frozen rent rates. The applicant contends that this is necessary for viability reasons. The business relocation plan, which is part of the Section 106 agreement, will require the developer to set out the reasons for prioritising the 3 selected small and independent retailers over those 3 not selected. And then moving on to the recommended revisions to the draft conditions, there's an amendment to the wording of condition 20, just to build in a bit more flexibility about the colour of the facing materials, so to allow for it to be a little bit warmer, and that is in direct response to a number of concerns raised by members of the public. But in conclusion, having taken into account the additional consultation responses and other additional information following consideration of the issues raised, the recommendation remains the same. And now I'll move on to the presentation itself. So, planning application 19/AP/7057 seeks permission for the partial refurbishment and reconfiguration of the existing Butterfly Walk shopping centre located on this prominent site in the heart of the Camberwell District Town Centre. As well as a refreshed retail environment, the proposal would deliver a cinema and hotel alongside 145 new homes. The application site is a 1.25 hectare irregular shaped plot of land located in the Camberwell Green ward. To the north, it is bounded by properties fronting Denmark Hill, Camberwell Church Street, Wren Road and Jesson Street. the south, it is bounded by Daneville Road, to the southwest by Orpheus Street, and to the west by Denmark Hill. The site comprises the low-rise shopping centre, Morrison's supermarket, and areas of surface parking and servicing yards. The site falls within the urban density zone, Camberwell Action Area, Camberwell District Town Centre, a protected shopping frontage, and an archaeological priority zone. The site contains no listed structures, but it is enclosed along its western and northern boundaries by the Camberwell Green Conservation Area. This conservation area overlaps a small portion of the application site adjacent to the colonnades. The Camberwell Grove Conservation Area is to the southeast of the site. These diagrams show the arrangement of the proposal in 3 blocks, A, B, and C. And here you can see some of the key details about the 3 blocks and how the different proposed uses would be distributed across the site. The first block, Block A, containing 63 homes, would be constructed on the eastern portion of the site. This would also include a small community facility. On Block B, the existing Morrison's supermarket would be retained with improvements to its facades. Over the western half of the supermarket, a 2-screen cinema is proposed, adjoining which, and to the south of the supermarket, would be a residential block containing 41 apartments. This is Block C, which at ground floor level would be largely retail space. This is the reconfigured shopping centre and much upgraded, above which would be a build-over development comprising a hotel and 41 new flats. And at the bottom of the slide, you can get a feel for the architecture of the 3 blocks. In terms of layout, the reconfigured shopping centre would occupy the northwestern corner of the site in a similar arrangement to the existing shopping centre, and as shown here in green. Shown in brown is a retained Morrison's store, and just to the northwest of the retained Morrison supermarket, you can see coloured violet the entrance vestibule to the proposed cinema. The base of blocks A and B can be seen along the southeastern edge of the plan, fronting Daneville Road. And then as you move up to first floor level, you get a better sense of the configuration of the 3 blocks. Block C in the top left-hand corner takes a U-shaped plan form wrapping around the central shopping street, while blocks A and B are of an L-shaped footprint. And here, as you move up to 4th floor level, you can see that arrangement of 1 U-shaped and 2 L-shaped plan forms more clearly. Here are some elevations of the proposal. The tallest element would be Block A. You can see this in the elevation at the bottom of the page. Block A is the building on the right-hand side of the image. It would be 8 stories tall plus rooftop plant, stepping down to 5 stories directly onto Daneville Road. It would then incrementally step down along the course of Daneville Road to 4, then 3, and then 2 stories. Referring again to the elevation at the bottom of the slide, you can see Block B opposite Block A. Block B would be in the main part 6 stories tall, rising to 7 at its eastern end, where it faces Block A across Wren Road. The top 2 elevations on the slide depict the buildings that would front onto Orpheus Street. The elevation in the top left-hand corner of this slide shows the principal frontage Block C would present to Denmark Hill. It would have a 4-storey base with 2 setback stories above, with further setback roof level plant. The elevation at the bottom of the slide shows the west-facing view from Wren Road. In terms of materiality, 3 tones of brown brick are proposed, window frames and balconies would be finished in bronze. Here are some visualizations of the proposal. And here is the view from Camberwell Green, comparing the existing with the proposed. New hard and soft landscaping, along with green roofs and green walls, would be provided. 19 on-site trees would need to be removed, 40 new trees are proposed, and financial contributions will be secured from the developer to mitigate the losses and to fund new off-site tree planting. This plan shows the areas of communal amenity space and play space at each of the 3 blocks. The ground level play and communal amenity space at the rear of Block A would be accessible by residents of all blocks, not just those living at Block A. An in-lieu contribution has been secured for 12 Renovus play space. In terms of the housing mix, this is the finalised distribution expressed in habitable rooms. It is compliant with adopted policy, offering 36.5% of the dwellings in affordable tenures. This slide sets out some of the key considerations in respect of the quality of residential accommodation. Generous floor-to-ceiling heights, a predominance of dual-aspect dwellings, and logical layouts with practically sized rooms would be achieved. There would, however, be dwellings with an undersized overall floor area and 13 rooms that fall short of the space standards. 3 of the 145 dwellings would have no private outdoor space, but these are significantly oversized one-bedroom units, all within close proximity of communal outdoor space. Moving on to the impact of the proposal on the amenity of existing surrounding residents, this slide summarises the substantial adverse daylight losses. The full detailed results for all surrounding properties can be found on pages 87 to 90 of the committee report, that's paragraphs 328 and 329. The following slides look at VSC impacts. VSC is a quantification of the amount of skylight falling on a window. There are 2 steps in understanding VSC. The first is the percentage loss, which is what this slide is showing you. So the percentage losses you are seeing here are expressing the VSC these windows will receive once the development has been constructed, as a proportion of the VSC the windows currently receive. Shown in red are the substantial adverse VSC losses. In orange are the moderate adverse VSC losses, and in yellow are the minor adverse VSC losses. The second step in understanding VSC is to look at the absolute retained VSC level. This expresses what the amount of daylight the window will receive once the development is in place. Here are the results for the properties at Kerfield Place that face towards the site. Again, this slide is showing that first step in understanding VSC impact, which, to reiterate, is the resulting VSC as a percentage of the existing VSC. It doesn't show the absolute retained VSCs. And these are the percentage losses for the Allendale Close properties. Again, minor adverse losses are shown in yellow, moderate adverse losses in orange, and substantial adverse losses in red. An understanding of the VSC percentage loss, which is what these 3 slides have shown you, is important, but so too is the second step of looking more closely at the absolute retained VSC level for each window. While we haven't shown here window maps of the absolute retained VSC levels, and while the percentage loss is significant in some cases, the properties themselves will in most cases receive good levels of light in the longer term. In terms of public consultation, the Council notified local people about the planning application when it was first submitted back in early 2020. Notifications were sent out again in April of this year following a number of changes made to the application by the applicant. These tables summarise the number of responses received from members of the public to the consultation and reconsultation. And obviously there have been some further representations since the publication of the committee report and before today's meeting, as I mentioned, when presenting the addendum. These are the objections to the proposal raised most commonly by members of the public. They are the height, scale and design of the proposed buildings, the viability of the hotel and cinema, the amount of affordable housing to be provided, increased pressure on infrastructure, that's in terms of transport and social infrastructure, and the potential for construction traffic to cause congestion and worsened air quality. A comprehensive list can be found in the committee report at paragraph 93. Through the course of the planning application process, the developer has made changes to the scheme, partly in response to officers' concerns and partly in response to public representations. Examples include improving space standards compliance across the dwellings, achieving a stronger weighting of family homes, including the provision of a 4-bedroom social rent unit where no 4 beds were previously proposed, and redistributing the tenures, moving the social rent dwellings away from Denmark Hill, enlarging the cinema, incorporating additional play space and communal amenity space, and increasing the number of new trees to be planted on site. In conclusion, the application would enable the beneficial reuse of one of Camberwell's most prominent, accessible and underdeveloped sites, and one that presently contributes little to the character of the local area. The proposal would deliver a high-quality mixed-use development retaining much of the existing retail and supermarket floor space in a reconfigured and upgraded format, complemented by a hotel, a two-screen cinema and a community facility. When also accounting for the 145 new dwellings, the mix of uses would diversify Butterfly Walk's commercial offer, enhance the local nighttime economy, reinforce the site's important district town centre role, and contribute to a mixed and balanced community. With regard to the design and height of the proposed buildings, it is recognised that the Block A bookend and the taller parts of Block B would be of a more urban scale than their immediate surroundings. However, the massing is considered to be appropriately distributed across the site. Through careful articulation and the use of high-quality architectural treatments, the overall height and massing would make an acceptable townscape response, preserving the character and appearance of the nearby heritage assets. It is recognised that there would be a substantial impact upon the daylight and sunlight enjoyed by some of the residential occupiers of surrounding buildings. It is important to recognise, however, that the site comprises an unusually low-rise collection of buildings alongside large areas of open space, meaning any reasonable and efficient redevelopment of the site will inevitably cause some sizable percentage losses. In the main, the retained levels would not be untypical for an urban London location. On balance, and while recognising the impacts, it is concluded that the merits of the scheme and the context within which it would sit would not justify the refusal of planning permission. Transport, highways, ecology, landscape, environmental, energy and socio-economic considerations have all been resolved to an acceptable level of detail, with final details of mitigation to be secured for a mix of conditions and obligations. Having applied the presumption in favour of sustainable development, officers consider that this would be a high-quality development, achieving the Council's aspirations for the area, delivering nearly 150 new homes and reinvigorating the Camberwell town centre. It is therefore recommended that members grant permission, subject to conditions as set out in the attached draft decision notice, referral to the GLA, and the timely completion of the Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Chair, if you don't mind, I'm Yvonne Lewis, I'm the Strategic Applications Manager at Southwark. Patrick has set out the detailed issues raised by this application, but I thought it might be helpful to also set out some of the broader policy context within which any decision must be considered. And as we all know, there's a critical need for more homes and more affordable homes, which means that policy at all levels, nationally and downwards, make the delivery of housing a key priority. And the London Plan, the new London Plan adopted in March, sets challenging housing targets for Southwark. And again, policy at all levels expects new housing to be concentrated on brownfield land, like as this is, and to be sustainable. That means it's focused on land which is well located for public transport and in places where existing services already exist, such as town centres. The London Plan also requires boroughs to optimise the use of land. It uses that term very deliberately. It doesn't say maximise, it says optimise, and to use good design as a way of doing that. This doesn't override the need to be mindful of character and context, but the London Plan uses the term incremental densification. And it also specifically identifies car parks and supermarkets as sites which are sources of potential capacity for new homes. Southwark, as I'm sure you all know, is working very hard on initiatives to support its town centres and ensure that they can continue to serve their local communities and adapting where necessary to the challenges not just posed by COVID, but also changes in the wider shopping patterns, such as internet shopping being more predominant. So developments such as this, which can refresh the shopping environment, but also pull more people into the town centre and drive footfall to support the local shops. None of this is to suggest that safeguarding amenity is not also very important, but I'm just recording that the consideration of those issues must be placed in the wider policy context and balanced with a range of policy objectives for the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Are there, first of all, the clarification questions from the committee? I see Councillor Livingstone, followed by Councillor Livingstone.
Yes, just a bit of a refresh for me, because I have done the training on daylight and sunlight, but I want to understand the difference between VSC and NSL. because that seems to be quite important for some of the diagrams here in terms of looking at daylight.
This handle up on now, I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
To put it as simply as possible, VSC is essentially the amount of light that would fall on a window plane, and therefore it's not relevant. The shape and size of the room is not relevant. It's about the amount of light that's falling on that pane. Whereas NSL looks at how much of the sky is visible from a certain point when stood within the room. So, for instance, if you're looking out onto a scene and there are some buildings that stand taller than others, obviously their height would have a reductive effect on the area of sky you're seeing. So, NSL is also referred to as daylight distribution. They are the same thing. So if you're seeing the terms NSL and DD anywhere, they're referring to the same thing, but essentially it is the amount of sky you can see from a point within the room, whereas VSC is the amount of light falling on the window pane.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Sorry, can I just be sorry, Patrick, really clear. It's the area of the room from which you can see the sky, rather than the amount of sky you can see from an area of the room. So if you imagine if you're standing at the back of the room, you're much less likely to see the sky than if you were standing closer to the window. So it basically measures how far back into the room you need to go to the point at which you no longer see the sky, and conversely how far forward into the room you would need to go before you begin to see the sky. So it measures the quality of light as it's distributed across the room.
Okay. Just so I just test my understanding of that. So where you've got a 58% reduction, you're saying that you have to be 58% closer to the window to see sky. Is that right?
Just about. I mean, it basically, yeah, yes. It's the area. It's a reduction of the area of the room from which you can see the sky.
Obviously, this is all 1-1. I can see. Who's next? Councillor Whittam.
Could you put up slide 18?
Which is the play space slide.
Looking at those two colours, the blue and the purple, they look roughly half and half, whereas the proposal figures are 492 and 1752. Can you explain the difference of those, please?
It's just occurred to me, I've forgotten to show areas of, on this diagram, areas of communal space on the mansion blocks at Block A. Sorry, this is a slide that I prepared, but there would be communal amenity space on the roofs of the Block A mansion blocks, which are the, if you're looking at this slide here, Block A is the one on the right-hand side of the screen, and you can see an area of blue and purple, sort of to the north of it. Well, there's also these areas of grey and white, just to the south of that, which I haven't shown on this diagram. Sorry, this is a diagram that I prepared, and I made a mistake in not showing that there would be communal areas on those rooftops. So that is what adds to the overall quantum of communal amenity space.
And can you tell me how wide is that very thin purple strip?
It's in the region of 3.5 metres.
And what can you do in 3.5 metres of communal space?
Well, the London Plan space standards London Plan play space, SPD, recommends that where you have play space, it can be really useful to have some common amenity space alongside it, where carers and parents can sit and watch the play space. So that should be in the common amenity space, which is why you'll see on all of these blocks that play space and common space are provided side by side, so that you have that ability to look at children while they're playing. Obviously, the play space needs to be designated play space. It needs to be for that purpose. And communal space should be where people sit and talk. And that's the idea of putting them side by side, so you have this opportunity to overlook and monitor children while they're playing.
And sorry,
Kathleen?
I just think-
Okay.
Apologies.
Hold on,
Julian.
let Yvonne add.
I was only going to make a really basic point that it might look as if there would be, but there wouldn't be a fence that divides them, so you don't get a little strip and then a play space. It's just the way the calculation works that they are just calculated separately, but in effect, the amenity space would link to the play space.
And are those blue areas going to be containing play equipment?
Yes, they would be. These play spaces are for doorstep play and for play for children aged up to 11. So typically you're looking at kind of small scale features for up to 5s, and for 5 to 11s, things like seesaws, that sort of thing, the details of which will be secured through an obligation, if I recall correctly. I have an obligation or a condition, I can't quite remember right now, but I can find out. Thanks.
I have another question about another topic.
All right. Go ahead, yes, go ahead.
Could you tell me the last time that we ever had a report containing details of internal space within dwellings that was lower than the minimum?
Sorry, I think, do you want to come, Colin?
Yeah, I think the answer, well, I know the answer to that, Kath, is I can't recollect reporting that to you, although I've obviously not been to all the planning committees. I think one of the points that we would like to make, though, is that in terms of gross internal area, I think there are only 2 of the flats which fall slightly short of the gross internal area, and then that shortfall is, I think, somewhere in the region of about half a square metre or so. I think it's a fairly small shortfall, and they are, I believe, in the private sale elements.
The word is minimum.
Yeah, as Colin explained, there are 2 dwellings that would fall short of the minimum GIA. One falls short by 1.5 square metres, and one, if I recall correctly, falls short by 0.5 square metres. It is referred to in the committee report. In both cases, however, the layouts of those properties are logical. All of the rooms are practically sized and would be able to accommodate a range of different types of furniture necessary to meet the likely number of people who would live in that property. So while there are some technical shortfalls, the layout is very rational and makes efficient use of that space, such that it wouldn't be noticeable or it certainly wouldn't compromise the ability of the future occupiers to live comfortably within either of those dwellings.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, sorry, but Councillor Whittam. Thank you. Can I just check who wishes to speak? I've got Councillor Bryan, Councillor Caldwell, and then we'll move on. Councillor Bryan, first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Can I correct you? There are actually 13 rooms which fall below the residential design standards for space. I don't want to sound like I'm doing a tag team with Kath, but there are 2 things. So there are issues. There are rooms that fall short of the residential design standards. There are rooms that fall short of the BRE standards for VSC, and there are properties which don't meet private amenity space. Unfortunately, from the data, all of that is not brought together in the report, so it's hard to tell, for example, which of those properties are affordable rent and which are private. Quite frankly, if they're private, then caveat emptor. And if I can ask a second question.
Go ahead, yep.
This is the tag team thing. Play space. I noticed on your slide that for over 12s, you've requested a payment in lieu for provision of play space for over 12s. I wonder where that payment, how that payment would be used, because I believe I read in the report, tell me if I'm wrong, that the nearest open space that a 12-year-old could kick a ball around is Burgess Park, which is quite a substantial distance from this development. I don't know the area that well, so
I think you may be right, Councillor Bryan. Let's hand over to the officer to respond.
Can I, perhaps, Councillor Brown, if I just come back on the shortfalls on the double bedrooms. Yes, and Patrick might want to follow up on that, but one of the things we checked was that where there were shortfalls on the double bedroom spaces, there were no shortfalls on the overall area of the flats themselves. So the flats aren't substandard in terms of their overall space. It's just that within the double bedroom, on some there are 0.5 square metres short of a standard for a double bedroom. But as Patrick said, we have checked that there is space for a double bed in there, which there is, and you can move around it. And I suppose 0.5 square metres is an area slightly smaller than the desk that we're all sat at the moment. And we have checked that the gross internal areas meet the minimum. Some of them actually exceed the minimums. So where you don't have the 0.5 square metre in the double bedroom, it is within the flat, and in some instances it's a slightly larger space. So some of the flats are somewhat oversized. And Patrick went through the process of checking which flats the shortfalls in the double beds were, and which flats which were the two flats where there was a slight shortfall on the area of the flat itself, which I think were the private ones. But perhaps if Patrick just comes back on that.
Yeah, so I just put up a slide just explaining this. So Colin's point is about the double bedrooms where you see relatively small shortfalls. If you refer to the fourth column, which talks about the shortfall, you'll see that they are, as Colin suggests, not much bigger really than the space of these desks that we're sat at. And then the fifth column is showing you the flats with each of those bedrooms are within either meet or exceed the minimum GIA. So as Colin suggests, although there may perhaps be a bedroom that it falls slightly short, the space is effectively made up elsewhere in the dwelling. And we've also just provided the tenures of those dwellings so you can understand where the sort of balance lies in terms of which dwellings experience shortfalls. And as you can see, the social rent dwellings are the ones that have perhaps a slightly smaller bedroom than would be required by the space standards, but none of those social rent dwellings have a GIA that's smaller than the minimum expectation.
Thank you very much. If I can go to Councillor James Caldwell.
Sorry, Chair, just the question about the over 12 play space in Birmingham.
Forgive me, indeed, yes, the proximity.
There are a number of options, but for those who wanted very, if you like, energetic or expansive play, Burgess Park isn't that far. They have a park which is closer, which is Ruskin, but that's in Lambeth. I don't suppose the Section 106 money would be heading in that direction. And there are a number of smaller spaces, the one on Vestry Road, but again, not a lot for older children there. But as I'm sure you see at most committees, I know this is an issue that Councillor Whittam is very interested in, that it's quite difficult. Being truthful, it is very difficult to accommodate teenage play on high density development sites or smaller development sites. They want a degree of independence, they want some space to be able to play, maybe slightly more remotely from their parents. And I think we find that directing them towards the bigger park is probably the most realistic option. Whereas the smaller children who do need to be closer to their family home, we always, most times, manage to accommodate on site.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. On to James Caldwell, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Patrick, for the presentation. I've got a question on the change to the affordable retail offer, which you introduced in the addendum report, and which says that now, instead of the affordable retail offer being extended to all 6 independent retailers, that's been reduced to 3. And given that presumably you, and by you I mean the planning department, will have, I imagine, sort of negotiated that with the applicant, and you would have considered it previously, if not to be a requirement of the recommendation for approval, certainly it would have been seen as a benefit. Could you just explain why you think this worse offer, particularly given we know that all 6 independent retailers have said they want to remain? Could you just explain why, in your view, this worse offer is still acceptable.
Thank you for the question. Through the course of any planning application process, we as officers will negotiate with the applicant team, and often the applicant team at the outset don't realise quite how many obligations they will be liable for. It is a discussion that takes place over the course, in this case, of nearly 18 months. There is a section of this committee report which explains the viability of the scheme, and as you'll see, it would essentially at the moment result in a profit deficit, and in part this is because there are a number of obligations that we are seeking from the applicant, and one of the obligations that was discussed at a later stage in the application process and expressly at the request of the GLA, to whom we refer the application and who advise on its accordance with the London plan. It was through that process that this matter of affordable retail was brought up. We as a borough don't actually have a policy that expressly requires affordable retail. It's something that's in the new London plan. And like I say, it was something that was discussed at a later stage. And at that point in time, the applicant felt that they could offer affordable retail, essentially frozen retail rates, to all 6 of the small and independent retailers. Obviously, like I say, because there was a significant profit deficit, the applicant felt that that was one respect in which they would have to reconsider the obligation they offered. And in fairness, obviously the shopping centre is currently low-grade retail floor space. A number of those smaller, or at least a few of those small and independent businesses are operating from it on actually quite favourable terms, simply because they are recent occupiers and they were made aware that the redevelopment was forthcoming. So they're only there on short-term leases that are relatively good rents anyway. When you bear in mind that obviously there's going to be a significant improvement to this retail floor space, the applicant just feels that they wouldn't be in a position to offer frozen retail rates to all 6 of them. There is one occupier that I know of. The applicant has given us a business retention strategy, but what I recall from that is that there is one occupier who is on a particularly subsidised rental rate at the moment, and so to continue to offer that to that occupier would be difficult for the applicant. That's why they've chosen to reduce the offer to free tenants, 3 of the small and independent ones. Perhaps the developer who's here tonight could explain a little bit more as to why they feel that they can only offer it to free and not.
Thank you very much. I think your key point's been made. Those legal officers wish to make a contribution.
Thank you, Chair. I was also wondering about this when I saw the addendum, because it basically allows the applicant to choose which, or suggest which 3 out of the 6. Now, members have no idea about what the background of those 6 traders is, and whether or not there might be some equalities impacts arising from this. And I think that's something that the applicant should be asked, because whilst it's not strictly a planning point, and I hear what's said about viability, there is the public sector equality duty, and members need to be sure that, that there are members from a particular group who are not disadvantaged by any decision. And the fact that the applicant seems to be making this decision is something which is something I think should be put to them, because I'm struggling that where actually members are going to comply with their obligation under the public sector equality duty under this suggestion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that intervention, and I knew that would stimulate further inquiries at this stage. I would ask members of the committee to bear with me at this point in time. I'm keen that we move forward to the objectors and to the applicants. And if following the supporters and ward members' contribution, there are still questions which are pertinent to the report and not applicable to the presenters, then of course we can ask questions of the report authors. So if you could bear with me, I'll move on. Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, I'll move on to objectors. Now, does anyone wish to speak in objection? Great, thank you. So if I just explain this to you, this meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. So you may choose to, I better say, wait, oh, well, I wanted you to say anyway. Oh, the government, huh? We're in person here. Don't you worry, it's a private joke. But I'll move on now. I move on to, I believe, the name I've got here is Arne Hansen.
Yeah, should I?
Yes. Now, are you the only objector here? Just make sure of that first of all. In that case, you can come forward. Forward.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start...
Forgive me. Could you sit down for 2 minutes? I need to, there's further details I need to pick up on. Okay. That, as you would have heard me say at the beginning of the meeting, that ideally your presentation should focus on issues that you wish the committee to ask further questions on yourself. Okay, you'll be given 3 minutes when I indicate, and I'll ask you first of all just to confirm your name and indeed your address, but not the street, the house number, just so we know who you are.
Yeah, the name is Arne Hansen and I live in Berkeley Place.
So yes, you would press the right.
Yeah, the name is Arne Hansen and I live in Kirkwood Place. Before I start the presentation, can I just ask a technical question? And this is the first time I'm in a meeting like this. There's of course a lot to cover, so I have typed out some key notes for each of the committee members to look at further. Am I allowed to hand this out, or is that not how it works?
One to take advice.
You wouldn't normally, I'm afraid.
I'm not normally. Okay.
Something which hasn't been submitted previously.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Forgive me, sorry, just so we're clear, and really just for others who might be listening to this recording, if there are objectors who are going to present and they really wish the committee to be aware of what they're going to say, I'm more than happy for you to send that information in advance so members have it, so it forms part of the committee's evidence base. Okay, just so you're clear. But you may wish to refer to your notes and invite members of the committee in your presentation to ask further questions of you. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set my timer up so that you'll be given 3 minutes. Yeah. When I indicate, you may begin. You may begin now.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, with a large development like this, there are many aspects of the development which neighbours of the development object to, as has been evidenced by the objections lodged on the Council's website. But time doesn't allow for me to deal with all of them now. I'll just have to focus on a few key points. The report of Patrick Cronin seems to me, and a number of my neighbours, to be able to recommend grant commission, partly because it chooses to minimise the many adverse effects of this development. And local residents hope that you will adhere to the Council's policies and will refuse permission for development which is contrary to them in a number of ways, as has been set out in some detail in objections submitted by the Grove Lane Area Residents Association of February last year. And I should mention, I'm not the representative of that association, but I feel that they made a good point in their application. The policies which underlay the requirement in the new Southwark plan for the south and east areas of the site to be lower rise are contravened by Block A. At over 36 metres high, Block A will be out of keeping with the generally low-rise part of Camberwell, and by virtue of its design will detract from the Camberwell Green and Camberwell Grove conservation areas. No wonder it is the aspect of the application which has given rise to most opposition based on the public application comments. Existing residents do not deserve the loss of privacy through overlooking the substantial loss of light to a number of neighbouring properties, or the loss of much valued large and mature trees from this urban area. And by the way, for instance, out of the trees that have been cut down, more than half of the areas which the applicant's own tree report said they will go. These are trees that were deemed to be of value to retain. The development will get rid of all of them. We do not share Patrick Cronin's assessment of the loss of light issue. For instance, the report from the Trident consultancy used by the applicant should be treated with caution. For instance, they stated that they had not been inside a single one of the properties that are part of this consultation. The air quality in Camberwell is not good, and it will be negatively affected by the long construction period. This will go on for a few years. As well as after residents move in, of course there will be plenty of delivery vans and so on. We all shop at Amazon and so on. There will be, not everyone is going to cycle or walk. That's just pie in the sky. There will be plenty more delivery vans and so on. The local community wants to retain the large trees. Smaller trees planted elsewhere in the borough, that's a poor substitute. And we don't feel that Camberwell is well served by having a development which is well packed by a development which is not adhering to council's property of single aspect dwellings. For instance, a number of them are facing north and a number of them are facing noisy roads. That contravenes policies. On that alone, they should be rejected.
Could you just turn off your microphone, please? Thank you. Are there questions from the committee wish to ask the objector? Councillor Whittam, go ahead.
Was there anything else you wanted to add at the end there?
No, I feel that I've covered most. My main point is that I feel that the tone, when I read the report by Patrick Brown, thought, well, this guy is a major cheerleader for this development. And as was mentioned earlier on now, some of the units will, so there will be only half a square meter. Some of them will be only smaller than minimum. But minimum is minimum, isn't it? Or is minimum no longer minimum? Where do we stand if we start moving the scale? Everything, it seems to me, and a number of my neighbours, is seen in the most positive light possible by the council. What about neighbours who are negatively affected by, for instance, loss of privacy? It's not just loss of privacy by people looking in from block A into your bedrooms or your lounge. It's also loss of privacy in your little garden. The rear gardens, and they do, so they are north facing, but they get afternoon sun, and they are much valued by the residents. They'll be overlooked. Not at least because all of the mature trees will be chopped down now. There are, I think, 6 trees in Denville Road, which were planted by the council some years ago, but they are substantially smaller than the trees that will be cut down. So, and there is substantial loss. For instance, my house is one of the worst affected houses by this development.
Thank you for that response. Could you again just turn off your mic for a moment? Councillor O'Brien, followed by Councillor Soames.
Thank you for coming tonight. I'm intrigued to find out what the relationship is between the developer and the residents in terms of, do you feel that you've been consulted? Have you expressed your concerns and fears to the applicant? What's the general relationship between the applicant and the residents?
Well, first of all, I must stress that this is the first development I'm involved in. I'm not like you guys who know the things at fingertips. But it seems to me that, yes, in that regard, it has been well run by the developers and by the council in that there have been consultations, there have been in Butterfly Walk on 2 or 3 occasions, like an open day, and you can come and speak to representatives and so on. What I do feel, and this is shared by a number of my neighbours, is that of course any private company wants to maximise the profit of any development. That's fine. But are you going to maximise it to the extent that it actually substantially negatively affects a lot of the residents? What about the residents in colonnades, for instance? They are going to be massively affected. So the windows that are facing block A there, for instance, they are blocked off, so there's only a window for a staircase. So they could argue that, well, it's not that much. But we've had substantially negative comments from neighbours in colonnades, and how there will be a great deal of noise for them. That's just one point. But it seems to me we are up against a professional developer who has hired specialists everywhere. And I'm sorry, but I work in business, so I know what consultancies are like. Of course, you want to deliver a report which can, well, I'm not going to cast aspersions at Trident, but are you going to deliver a report that which means that the party that employs you is not going to employ you next time they need you? Of course, you are going to try to have a positive slant on things. Trident didn't have a single visitor inside any property. So how can they then talk so much about percentages, 36% and so on? To me, it's quite laughable in a way. They were there. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got your point now. We've got your point. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Soames.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Henson. You touched on the impact that, from your perspective, on privacy and sunlight, daylight, and you touched upon it in your formal presentation around the conservation area of Camberwell Green and Camberwell Grove. From your perspective, what sort of impact do you think this proposal would have on the conservation area? You mentioned heights of buildings, etc. Could you elaborate?
I feel that there is a creep. Once they allow a large development like this coming in, there will be, as I mentioned earlier on, for instance, there will be more traffic. Of course there will be. And fair enough, we're living in big cities, so we have to accept that to some extent. But I feel that it's a sliding scale. Once you start allowing, for instance, comments saying that, well, the fact that you don't abide by minimum standards, well, that's a technical issue. No, a square meter is a square meter. There's nothing technical about it. And if you start allowing things to slide like that, you allow them to start sliding in all sorts of other areas. Sure, so we can cut down, I think it was 15 of the trees that had to be cut down are of retainable value according to the tree experts that the applicant hired. Where do you stop? Once you start, it's like the police says, once you start allowing people to graffiti a wall and don't remove it, the next thing you know, you have a broken glass window and so on and so on. You've got to have a firm line saying, there are clear policies. For instance, what about single aspect dwellings? There are, I believe, 10 single aspect dwellings that are affected. I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit now, but it goes to the general point, in that they are facing north or facing busy roads. Why is this application recommended by the council? I don't understand. What about the point of not allowing something above 30 meters, for instance, for Block A? Why is this acceptable? So I'm sorry, I don't know enough about conservation areas, I'll openly admit. But I do feel that this is an application that is, while of course a fair bit of money has been spent by the developers, so on, all sorts of consultants and so on, it is still, it seems to me and a number of my neighbours, an application that tries to get away with doing as little as possible and as cheaply as possible and cram in as many units as possible, regardless of what it affects the local neighbourhood. And
I think we've got your key point
okay.
there. We have. Thank you, Hanson. Councillor Soames.
Yes, you said that your property would be one of the properties that would be most affected. How will it be affected by this particular proposal, please? Can you just specifically speak or talk to your the impact on yourself?
Yes.
And Mr. Hanson, if I can encourage you, please, to be concise this time.
Yep.
Thank you.
I will. Well, my house is facing Daniel Road, and it was, as I mentioned before, there's a loss of privacy, but there's also the loss of daylight, and I think also a vertical sky component. The Trident Light report highlighted a number of properties. I think it was about 4 or 5 properties in Gloucester Place that had substantial loss, and the property I live in is one of them. So it will mean that now with the trees to be cut down, that partition the car park from Daniel Road, when they are gone there's nothing screening us. Therefore, you will have residents looking into your home, looking into your garden, and so on. That's just an example.
Thank you. Do I see Councillor Johnson? I stopped you early on, so yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for taking the time to come in and explain your concerns. I wondered, when you look at this design, this proposed design, if you could wave a magic wand and you could change fundamental elements of it, how would the design change to reach a point where you felt this is a good design? Or, in your mind, are you saying there is no such thing as a good design for this site, there should be no development?
What I was going to say, but I ran out of time, is that, of course, we're not against redevelopment of the site. I am aware, and I've lived there for many years, I am aware that the car park is not used to capacity. But our view is that it is excessive. For instance, we have wondered, one way of retaining the trees that partition the car park from Dayton Road would be maybe to move the development back a bit so that the trees we keep them for the environment, they also provide a certain level of privacy. Also, while, for instance, Selborne Village, of which Copen Place is a part, doesn't have anything higher than 3 stories, I think. And yeah, of course, ideally we would like something not higher than that, but I appreciate that is not necessarily compliant with guidelines that all councils have to abide by. But to go up to effectively 9 stories, I feel, and I have almost 180 people, according to council's website, agreeing with me. Well, not all of them said that, but a large proportion of the people who complained and registered the complaints, they complained about the height. It really is well and truly excessive. And as I say, it contravenes the policies of not building something that tall in the southern end of the site. Pardon me, but presumably I'm missing something here, but I can't see, why would the council recommend this?
Okay, we've got that key point, and members have noted your comments. In that case, I want to thank you for your presentation and responding to members' questions. Thank you very much indeed. Indeed, I'm reminded, of course, we now need a 5 minutes break. We will reconvene at 19:55. We now move on to the applicant or applicant agents. I've got a number of people here. Sean Tickles, Josh Thomas, are they present? Please come forward. One table, I noticed, of course. There you are.
Yeah, I will lead the master of ceremony, so I can call people up if they need to. Yeah.
Rather, and your name, sorry.
Sean Tickle.
Excellent, excellent. I believe, Sean, you are familiar with the committee's procedure in terms of the time allocated, 3 minutes.
Yes, I've been here occasionally, sir.
Yes, there you go. I'm going to ask you to formally introduce yourself, and once you've done that, I will indicate you can begin your presentation. Please begin.
My name is Sean Tickle from Mortgage Planning. I've got a number of members of our team behind us so that we can start if you have any questions after I've finished.
Very good. You may now begin.
Butterfly Walk Shopping Centre is one of the key focal points for Camberwell. Spot Property have been the owners of Butterfly Walk for over 20 years and in this time have invested very heavily in the infrastructure of the centre. The existing centre comprises a series of low-height buildings and 2 open car parks, and with changes in retailing occurring, tenant leases coming to an end and a push both nationally and in London towards making effective use of underused land such as shopping centres, the opportunity to develop the site for a genuinely sustainable mixed-use development has come forward. This opportunity has been identified by the Council in the New Southwark Plan, where Butterfly Walk is part of a wider site allocation for a residential and retail-led development. At its heart will be a new attractive public space linked to improved permeability with new linkages to Orpheus Street. The new public space has been designed to ensure that they do not impact on neighbouring amenities in the colonnades and are safe and secure. Many of the existing tenants on site, including Morrison's, will remain trading throughout the construction, and those tenants who are leaving will be given the opportunity, if they wish, to have first refusal on new units. The cinema has been increased in size and ongoing dialogue is occurring with Peckham Plex. A detailed hotel report by CBRE has identified strong and growing demand for hotel beds, and Premier Inn have expressed strong interest in the hotel. The 3 residential buildings will deliver 145 new spacious homes for the borough, which include 35% affordable housing, 25% of which will be social rented homes with a high provision of rented family homes. The scheme includes a range of usable private and communal amenity spaces and a range of play spaces for children. The buildings do range in height between 2 and 8 stories, although most buildings are 6 stories or lower, and the choice of materials reflects those across Camberwell whilst delivering modern design. We are aware that there are effects on neighbouring homes through reductions in daylight. However, the percentage decreases are almost wholly the result of the entire site being underdeveloped, and surrounding properties will retain very good levels of daylight and sunlight, which we can explain. The scheme has been designed to achieve a very high environmental standard and promotes sustainable travel, substantially reduces car park and introduces significant areas of greening, and the reuse of the centre is a key benefit. The scheme has been subject to a very extensive public engagement, including 4 in-person public exhibitions, the Community Council Forum, and a large number of meetings with key stakeholders. In summary, the scheme is very much a question of planning balance, balancing the benefits of the scheme against some of the side effects. Whilst developing an underused site such as this creates impacts to surrounding neighbours and introduces increased scale and massing to the area, it delivers a vastly improved retail centre, new uses which strengthen the vitality of the centre, delivers new exciting public realm, which will be a focal point for Camberwell, delivers new homes, including social rented family homes for local people, and substantially improves the sustainability of the site. And we would welcome your support and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Impeccable timing. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Indeed. Right. So, can I invite members of the committee to indicate? This time I'll start from my right, to give you kind of some downwards. So, Councillor Williams, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Caldwell, and Councillor Livingston. Councillor Williams.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I would like to refer to the addendum and paragraphs 16 through 18. I wonder if you could explain to the committee what's the thought process and the baseline that you've adopted, reducing from 6 to 3 affordable retail offer to 3 units.
I think as the planning officer explained very well, I thought, the process has been one of negotiation on a number of different Section 106 matters. And this one was, to be honest, still outstanding by the time we got to the committee report. Just to say that the 3 retail units that we're offering represent 15% of the overall retail floor space of the centre, excluding Morrison's. Morrison's obviously a very single building. Morrison's is being retained, as are a large number of our other existing retail units. So this is not a situation where you have a lot of development happening, you take the tenants away, you bring them back to new development. This is existing retail tenants, many of whom are staying, some of whom are going, some of whom will come back. So in line with your plan policy about affordable workspace and affordable retail space, we're achieving actually 15% on the 3 retail units. The 6 retail units would have been circa 30%. The planning officer explained very carefully that the viability on this scheme is difficult. It has been a challenge on this scheme. And in light of that, the applicant was very clear that it would be extremely difficult long term to have such a fix on the freeze of the rents for the long term viability of the scheme. So unfortunately, whilst it would be desirable to have as many small retail units at the frozen rates, it is just not viable to do so. But that what we are proposing is effectively 15% of the overall retail space, excluding Morrison's. In terms of the point, sorry, I was going to say the point in terms of the legal officer made, I think we would just need to, I think we were looking at the tenant, perhaps not necessarily the space itself, and those we would certainly talk to the tenants about this. But just to say that, and I think the planning officer mentioned it, that many of the tenants are on quite desirable, shall we say, low rental because of the development has been coming forward. The applicant has been discussing rental with all the tenants, and many of the tenants are staying in place. For example, the report mentions the pharmacy. The pharmacy has signed up for lease. Nunhead Gardeners have signed up for lease, even though their unit will go. So there is a toing and froing, and I think the retail strategy that is set out in, I think, the planning obligations will actually hopefully address all of those key issues.
Thank you. I suspect we may return to that. So I won't take further questions on that particular point. We will return to it. I want to encourage members to ask other questions for now. Who's next? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Sean. Could you perhaps expand? You said that you've had many consultations with key stakeholders. Could you just expand on who those stakeholders were, and also did they include ward councillors?
Yes, I can. This may take some time. This is possibly one of the most consulted and engaged projects that I've ever been engaged with in Southwark. We've undertaken 4 in-person exhibitions starting from September 2018, where we had a 3-day exhibition in the GX Gallery. The first day was Camberwell Society, SC5 Forum, and Grove Lane residents were invited to it, as were the residents of the Colonnades, who are the block that is possibly the most, could be the most impacted, but we've been very careful not to impact on them. We then had a subsequent exhibition on, I think it's in March 2019, again the GX Gallery, again 3 days, again 1 day of that was stakeholders, SC5 Forum, Camberwell Society, and then 2 days of general public exhibition. We then had a public exhibition, just to say that we would have held the public exhibition in the centre, but there wasn't any free units. In June 2019 we had a public exhibition in the centre. That was again 3 days. We had a lot of passing trade, so we had a significantly more footfall going through the exhibition then. Again, all the key stakeholders were invited to that. And then finally, as the planning officer said, in January 2020, there was a public exhibition again in the centre, again using a vacant unit. Again, that was 3 days, which would have been, I think it was a Wednesday, Thursday and a Saturday. We went to the Camberwell Community Forum in February of last year, where we presented to not only the 3 ward councillors, but the ward councillors of the adjoining wards as well, and about 25 members of the public. We've had meetings with the Camberwell Society, with a number of meetings with the Camberwell Society, had a number of meetings with the SC5 Forum, including discussions at the start of this year with their identity group about how we can introduce the Camberwell identity and the branding into the development, both the existing centre and the future development. We've had discussions with the Grove Lane Residents Association. We were actually asked to present to the Grove Lane, but unfortunately timings didn't allow us to do that. But we have been in discussion with Nick Powell. We've met the Met Police, we've done a design review panel, and we've also had separate meetings with the Colonnades. So we've had a lot of discussion with local residents.
Indeed, yes, go ahead.
And what feedback did you get? Was it generally positive?
Yes, it was, and I'm not saying being optimistic in this. We took at the exhibitions, we gave everybody a form to fill out, and they put their views on it. And in all 4 exhibitions, at least 80% of people were in support of the scheme, and that included the first 2 exhibitions where the buildings were quite substantially higher than they are at the moment. As we've gone through the exhibitions, we've cut away. We started to think of 14 stories, and we've now done 8 stories. May I just make a quick point on the height, by the way, if I'm allowed to? Unfortunately, the objector is incorrect in stating it's 36 metres. It's actually 29.9 metres. It's 36 metres above ordnance datum, which is above sea level. So the building is actually below 30 metres and therefore does not constitute a tall building.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. I believe who's next in line? Councillor Soames.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering how much work or thought has been given, or have you done any sort of work on the equalities impact? And I'm specifically thinking about the residents on Wren Road and the vulnerability of those residents that occupy the hostel. Now, at the nearest point, there's only a distance of 13.25 metres with a maximum of 22.5 metres, notwithstanding that also there is a percentage, BSE percentage loss in windows, the highest being at 45%. The officer has actually colour graded the sort of severity of it. Have you given any thought around the vulnerability of those residents and the impact of the proposal? And if so, how much discussion was given on that in terms of the impact on potentially their mental health if there's going to be a loss of light, and also notwithstanding that the officer has said that the windows are oblique to the proposed hotel in terms of distance from the property at 13 and 13.25 metres distance. But
Very long question,
can you just,
Councillor.
well, I just want to know what discussion around that, because there are compounding impacts in terms of the vulnerability of those particular residents on Wren Road.
Well,
sorry, could you just press your button? Yep.
We've taken into consideration the equalities and vulnerability of, I think, all residents around the area, but we are mindful that Wren Road is a hostel for people who in extreme need, and we've had discussions with the council's regeneration team again about that development, because it's a council-owned building. In terms of the impact of the scheme, well, we've certainly cut away the scheme substantially away from that building. At the moment, they front on to the service yard, and the service yard, the relationship with the service yard will actually remain. So there's not a significant change in terms of the immediate context. We have the hotel, which is probably the primary aspect of the scheme which affects the windows, but that then sets back away from the development. You're right, it is 13 metres at the very apex of the site, but it very, very quickly moves away because it's a sort of, as you say, it's an angled relationship. So very quickly it's well over 20, 30, and eventually it's nearly 60 or 70 metres away in terms of the windows from the hotel. In terms of the daylight to those windows, whilst there is an impact in terms of the loss of the vertical sky component, or the reduction in the vertical sky component, as the planning officer was explaining, it's retained light which is actually the most important aspect of this, and I think this will come on other aspects of the scheme. But the Mayor of London has been sort of consulting recently on changes to the Housing Design Guide, his Good Quality Home Guide, and he identifies that in London, an application of the 27% BSC figure, which is a national figure for which is used across the country, is not appropriate, and actually figures of below 20% are still delivering extremely good light in urban contexts, such as town centres, which this is. Just to say that actually looking at the figures, which I have here in terms of retained light, every single window in Wren Road, apart from 2, enjoys over 20% vertical sky component. So they're still enjoying very, very good levels of light, you know, comparable to sort of semi-suburban areas, in truth. The reason there is a reduction, the reason we have this conflict between reduction of VSC and retained level of light is because the existing site is so low at the moment that they have exceptionally good daylight to the hostel. And actually, by a small reduction in that, they will still have extremely good levels of retained light. And we don't believe that they will be significantly impacted in that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the detailed response. Councillor Johnson, then followed by Councillor Caldwell. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. A growing consideration for planning committees when considering new applications is the carbon footprint of any new development. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what steps are proposed to minimise the carbon impact, both of the construction of the site and also the site materials itself.
Chair, I can start. I do have Martin Taylor of Meinhardt with us, who's an energy consultant, if you would like to hear from him.
If that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
Both appropriate, yeah. If I can first of all just ask you just to identify yourself, your name and the organisation. I think you may respond to the question.
Sorry, this is on. I'm Martin Taylor from Meinhardt. We are mechanical electrical engineers for the scheme, and we've also prepared the energy strategy, which responds to the requirements for both Southwark and the GLA. So,
yep, go ahead. You may go ahead and respond.
In terms of the scheme, as I said, responds to both the Southwark requirements and the GLA requirements. And as the Chair mentioned, or Planning Officer mentioned, it is a GLA referable scheme. And without wishing to get too technical, we're offering a 35% carbon reduction compared to the benchmark of the building regulations of 2013. The GLA energy policy has changed significantly over the last 2 years. We're proposing air source heat pumps for this scheme, which again is GLA compliant. And with the improvement in the carbon efficiency of grid supplied electricity, if we benchmark the scheme now, we would actually be saving 60% carbon against the building regulations of 2013. And that's a reflection of the fact that air source heat pumps are electrically driven, and the grid supply electricity is now much less carbon efficient than it was, so much less carbon intensive than it was 2 years ago. We've also undertaken a BREEAM assessment. This is the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment method. And it's a way of benchmarking the scheme, not just in terms of energy use, but in terms of water use, the proximity of public transport to lessen reliability on cars. It also talks about construction methodology, reuse of materials, and the type of new materials which would be used in the scheme. For example, you wouldn't have any volatile type paints. It would all be... So there's a whole section on material use, carbon, water, transport. So we've actually, the BREEAM assessment for the non-residential part of the scheme has an excellent rating, which is again compliant with the Southwark and GLA policy.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive response. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Caldwell. Caldwell, indeed. Thank you. You have a question.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a question about the cinema. I was looking through the officer's report earlier on some of the changes that have been made to the scheme during the application, and most of them seem to me to make a lot of sense, and lots of them seemed quite positive changes. One that I was a bit confused by was the increase in the size of the cinema screens, which had gone from 2 60-seater screens to 2 80-seaters, and it's not really for us to get into, you know, how, you know, your commercials necessarily, other than if you know, the scheme turns out not to be viable. Why are you sort of confident that a cinema, and particularly a bigger capacity cinema than was previously planned, is a sort of a viable option in you know, given the last 18 months we've all lived through and changes in behaviour?
It's a very good question. Actually, one of the criticisms perhaps that was when we had the exhibition was the cinema too small, and whether it should be a 3-screen cinema. We had 2 60-person screens. We've been in discussion with a couple of the local cinema operators, but primarily Peckham Plex, who obviously operate a fantastic facility in Peckham. They have 6 screens, I believe, in Peckham, and they're very interested in taking this as a satellite function to their Peckham, so it wouldn't be a completely standalone facility, which means that a lot of the back of house stuff doesn't need to be there, so it works very well for them. So effectively everything's done online now in terms of booking, so it's quite easy to arrange. And actually one of the things they said was they fill their screens, and 60-person screens were quite small for them. And so as a result, and because we have a little bit of space on top of the roof, there was issues about structure, which was one of the reasons we were being very careful about the size of the screens. But we found a way to make the structure work, so we've now got 2 80-person screens. So it's more, I think, a very positive improvement to hopefully make it more likely that Peckham Plex will come on board.
Yes, go ahead.
Just thank you for the answer, and just a quick follow-up. So I've got a summary of the objections that were raised that are summarised in the report, and there are 32 people that said they think there's no demand or the cinema's not viable, and only 15 who said they think it would be too small. Are those 32 people just sort of too pessimistic?
Certainly, they are in comparison to the people who came to the public exhibition, who most of whom, and it was, you know, I think nearly 200, I think, over the 3 days in the last one. Most of the people were very supportive of the cinema. They were just wanting to make sure that it would be actually delivered. I think they've been promised cinemas before and it's just not come forward. This is something that we're working with a local cinema operator, and we believe it is achievable. So yes, I mean, people can be concerned about that, but I think we certainly believe hand on heart and through the discussions with Peckham Plex that we can deliver it, and we can deliver something that really suits their needs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Livingstone, did you? Yep.
I did. I'm being at the end of the row. I think a lot of what I was interested in has already been asked, but I did just want to check the response that you gave to Councillor Soanes in regard to the Wren hostel, and you were saying that there was only 2 windows that are reduced to a level that's below the minimum standard in terms of BSC, is that correct? And just to check, are those the only 2, or are any of the other properties that have been affected by the development in terms of daylight being reduced to below that minimum level?
I think it's difficult to say standard in relation to daylight, because daylight is a guidance, and it's very clear that BRE says it is guidance and should not be used necessarily as a development control tool, but it is very much a very key part of all of these sorts of presentations. In terms of whether there are 2 windows which meet standard, 2 windows which don't meet standard, it is an emerging policy and guidance about retained levels of light, because retained levels of light are the most important aspect of what we talk about when we talk about light to somebody's property, whether that property is still getting a very good level of light. If you have an exceptional level of light and you reduce it by by putting 2 or 3 story, 4-story buildings on it. It can reduce it over the 20% reduction that's in the BRE, but the property is still getting an extremely good level of daylight, and the Mayor has been, in his good quality guidance, talks about between 13 and 18% in London as being still achieving good levels of sunlight, good levels of daylight. And just to say that in Wren Road at the moment, the Wren Road Hostel, only 2 of those windows are below 18% at the moment. So I didn't say 20%, I thought it should be 18%. But those 2 windows, one of those windows is actually the window which is furthest away, which is the 60 metres away from our block. And it's the result of that is because it's right next to an existing building and therefore has a canyon effect. So it's very difficult to not impact on that particular window, but all of the other windows are achieving well over 20%, that's 18%, which is in line with the Mayor's good quality guidance coming forward, has been good levels of daylight which is retained.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just one separate question. It was a follow-up on the affordable business space.
Can I answer? We'll hold that question to last. I will definitely take care of all the other questions and we can return to that. We're definitely going to return to it, I can assure you. I just want to take any other questions first of all. Councillor, I will return to you, Councillor Livingstone. Councillor Soden, followed by Councillor Whittam.
I think I will seek further clarification from the officers on the. I was going to retain my follow-ups supplemental to the officers, so just a warning in advance. Could you say a little bit more about the officers referred in the report, in I think paragraph 276, around incidental play space. Now we know that there's been a reduction in play space, or there is a reduction in Block B, Block C, and so there's a suggestion or a proposal that residents take advantage of the adjacent communal space because of the shortfall. And we had a discussion earlier on around, guardians or parents can sit in the communal space and look at their children in the place, in the designated play space, which is actually not ideal because communal space and is communal space, play space is play space, and if they're sort of encroaching on the other, then I would suggest that there would be an impact on those individuals that just want to enjoy the communal space. So that's, from my perspective, very unsatisfactory. But can you tell me a little bit about the incidents? Because it's the first time I've come across this phrase, incidental play space of 446 square metres on Daneville Road, please. Thank you.
Sorry, could you just...
Paragraph 276, I think it is. London Plan, it refers to the London Plan policy of S4 in the report.
Right, okay, just go back on the play space. Whilst we've shown on a plan...
So your microphone, just press your button.
Yeah. Apologies, Chair. Whilst we've shown on a plan play space and communal space, those spaces, as the planning officer was explaining, are themselves, there's no separation between those areas. So they are just a provision of really good quality amenity and play space which are provided in each of the 3 blocks. How the residents use those spaces will be intermixing. So there will be, some. You're not going to say all the residents.
Sorry, forgive me if I'm wrong. That's not how we actually view it. When we look at play space, we designate and we would hope that it would be used in for the meterage that is quoted, or the space that is reserved or ring fenced for that space. That's how I would speak for myself, but I think on committee members, that is how it would be used, and not necessarily merged or intertwined. So you're suggesting something different. There is a shortfall of the play space. There's an adjacent communal space. So
Councillor Soames, forgive me. You've answered the question, allow him to respond. There may be some commentary to be attached to it, admittedly, but it's important to let the presenter respond completely to the questions. We may have follow-up questions as a result. Okay, but continue.
Apologies.
Yeah, go ahead.
Apologies, In terms of the incidental space, that's a space I believe that's indicated being on Daneville Road. It's outside of the red line boundary. It's not counted in the place-based figures, I believe. It's just as additional incidental opportunity. Daneville Road, as you know, is pedestrianised between Wren Road and close up to Grove Lane, and therefore there is an opportunity to use that space for incidental seating, communal play, and perhaps some incidental play. But we're certainly not relying on that in our figures. In terms of our provision of whether we meet standards, we're over providing in communal amenity space, and we are meeting the requirement for 0 to 5s and 5 to 11s. The only provision that we're not able to provide on site is over 12 space. As the planning officer was explaining, it's very difficult on all sites to, unless you've got a very large site with lots of green space, to provide the type of space that really works for over 12s. There is facilities that can be used on Camberwell Green, although they're very limited, and Burgess Park is close by. There's obviously the leisure centre as well, and we'd hope that actually the cinema itself would be a function for over 12s, but we are providing that contribution in line with the planning policy. So we're meeting play space and communal space for everything apart from over 12s.
Thank you.
But there is a shortfall.
Of course.
Thank you.
Indeed, I think that's been acknowledged. Councillor Whittam.
Can you talk me through the community space, which is right next to the bin store, and indeed smaller than the bin store? Doesn't have any sink to make a cup of tea, doesn't have a toilet. I haven't got a paragraph number. On page 72, I think. So basically, it's neither use nor ornament.
We'd hope not. We've had some discussions with Camberwell Society and ST5 Forum about the provision of a small facility for local residents to use. It could be to meet up. It could be to provide places for an exhibition. It could be places for information on history or other parts of Camberwell. And it is being provided by the applicant at a peppercorn rent. It will be maintained and cleaned, etc., by the applicant. There's no impact to local groups or the council in terms of the operation of this space. At the moment, the arrangement inside has not been finalised, but it has the capacity to provide a small toilet, and it will be something we believe is actually quite beneficial to the local community.
Councillor Whittam.
It is on page, so it's paragraph 187. And it does say somewhere on there that there would be no need for a toilet. I just wonder where the nearest public toilets are if a toilet isn't provided. Because if people are meeting there for an exhibition, whatever, they need those facilities.
As I said, we can look at the provision of a toilet in that facility. It wouldn't be a public toilet in the sense that anyone could use it, because I think that would create a different situation. There are toilets which are around Camberwell, which are available. Within the shopping centre itself, there are a couple of units. Obviously, McDonald's and I think Morrison's both have toilets within them as well for public use. So there can be a provision of a small toilet in there for use by the community groups, and we'd be perfectly happy to look at that as we go forward.
That's duly noted. There are no further questions. If I may return to the issue of the affordable retail units. First of all, I just want to express some disappointment that we've had the report for some weeks now, and members of the committee have studied it, and of course to see in the addendum that the amount of space is being reduced from 6 to 3. So this does raise a number of issues which I would like to have dealt with prior to meetings such as this, but we've got no choice at the moment. And notwithstanding your highlighting viability, just want to understand how will you decide which of these 6 legitimate traders will obtain these 3 retail space? Well, what formula will you use that will be compliant with our planning, indeed council policies?
I think that will take some consideration, Chair. I'll be absolutely honest. Just to say, I think the pharmacy is actually staying in place during the development anyway. So that was one of the 6 units which was identified. It's not actually moving. As we explained before, this isn't a redevelopment and all the tenants are going away and coming back in. Most of the tenants, or many of the tenants, are staying. Superdrug, McDonald's, Morrison's.
I'm going to have to press you. I'm really sorry. I'm just conscious of time. And,
okay, so I told you.
Well, my question is really clear. How will you decide, of the 6, who will be the remaining 3 that will be able to take advantage of the affordable retail space?
All of the tenants will be offered an opportunity to take a unit in the space. The opportunity for the frozen retail units, we have identified to the officer that it was units, which was the first 3 on. Just apologies, Chair. I'll just get the table.
And I'm wondering if you've maybe couched your response in some policy terms that the committee would understand that will ensure that particularly traded with particular characteristics, to ensure that we, in our final deliberations, are satisfied that the method used is policy compliant. And policy compliant is a key word here. It's arrived here at the very last moment. Under normal circumstances, I would want this matter to have been dealt with prior to committee commencing. But we're stuck here at this juncture with the need to resolve this issue. We need to be resolved to the satisfaction that it is policy compliant. It could be a very key.
Chair, may I just ask the actual applicant, who Raphael Hyatt, who actually runs the centre, he can actually provide you with hopefully some more clarification on this point.
Happy, please.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening. First of all, forgive me. So I can ask you first of all just to say your name and the organisation that you work for, and then you can respond to my question.
My name is Rafiq Ahmed Hyatt, and I am a director at Spot Property Company. And this is the centre that we have run for the last 20 years.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, can you respond to that question?
Sure.
What methodology will you use to decide of the 6 units which were in the report? As of today, it's been reduced to 3. What methodology will you use to decide which of these traders will take advantage of these affordable retail space that will be compliant with our planning equalities policies?
Can I just give some background?
Most certainly.
This development came into being because Morrison's lease was coming to an end, and we then lined up all the other leases to be coterminous with the Morrison lease so that we could actually effect a development. The first plan was to get rid of everything and start again. But then at the very early consultation, we were told that retail, as far as possible, should be preserved. So we decided we'd try and keep retail there. Morrison said they would like to continue to trade during the development, so we agreed with them that whatever happens, we'll try and facilitate that. Most of the traders within the centre, which includes McDonald's, Superdrug, Snappy Snaps, Poundland, Holland and Barrett, card shop, they all want to renew. And including the pharmacy, and none had the new person, they have come in. Although we will have to take them out because the structural, the way the structure is going to be formed means that unit will have to be vacated for the structure to go in, but we will bring them back in. So we have done a 10-year lease with them so that they can come back in after we have reorganized the work.
I just, before you continue, just to clarify, are all 6 traders that we're discussing here, have they retained a lease with yourselves for a minimum period of 10 years?
Not all of them, but we have offered at this moment in time to all of them.
Okay, so forgive me, it is significant, forgive me, I'll follow in front of you.
Sure.
Of those 6, which of those have a lease agreement or been in the centre for less than 10 years?
Just remind me, please, which one, because I need to.
Sorry,
I can give you the information. Sorry.
Paragraph 142, but it's Urban Desire.
I've got it.
Urban Desire.
Speedy Courses.
Speedy Courses.
Mustang Beauty. Butterfly Walk, Pharmacy, Bargain Express, and the Nunhead Gardener.
Mustang. Sorry.
Okay, but we said that these are all less than 10 years?
Sorry, no, this is a list of the 6 smaller independent shops that currently operate from the shopping centre. So Urban Desire, Speedy Courses Limited, Mustang Beauty Limited, Butterfly Walk Pharmacy, Bargain Express, and the Nunhead Gardener.
So my question still remains,
sure.
Of these tenants, how many have had a contract, been there less than 10 years?
Sure. Can I just explain that because of the redevelopment and because there is potential that we may have to move tenants during the redevelopment, some of them, because of the structural work that have to be undertaken, we have given them leases with development breaks. Right?
So, again, I won't ask that question again, but the question is very deliberate. Understanding that those tenants have been in the shopping centre for a minimum period of 10 years, you of course have some obligation to. And now my follow-up question is still, how will you decide who of the 6 are retained in the 3 remaining affordable retail units?
We can give you the names now if that helps, does it?
No, I simply want the methodology. What's the methodology you use?
Methodology is that, for instance, with Nunhead Gardeners, we have given them a 10-year lease with a development break, but we'll bring them back in because we are committed to giving them a longer lease.
Okay.
Similarly, Pharmacy, they have been there a long time. We are committed to bring them back in.
All right. Okay, forgive me. I know it's really, we're speaking sort of planning language, which is awful, really, isn't it? Anyway, in order for us to proceed, forgive me, could you just turn off your mic just for a moment, just so I'm clearly understood and said that we would not normally do it in a sort of public meeting, but it is what it is for now, because the changes were made at the very last moment. I would really want such matters to be dealt with in advance of this meeting, so it's clear and unambiguous. So let me do it again. There is an issue of equalities here, okay? And we want to be satisfied that in the formula that you will apply to decide of the 6, which will now be 3, that it's equal. It complies with our equalities policies. Okay? So we want to be satisfied that those who remain reflect the diversity and of opportunities that we would expect a landlord like such yourself to offer small businesses. So it shouldn't be of a particular kind, it should be reflective of our diversity. So we don't really need to know the name of the organisation, we're interested in methodology. How will you apply our policies to resolve this quandary? Criteria, indeed.
We will do whatever you want.
Okay.
Can I say that?
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what the criteria is, but whatever you'd like, we'll do.
In that case, then I'm not going to take this further. We'll speak to the officers post this presentation. But thank you very much. We'll speak to the officers post this presentation.
We'll do whatever you want.
I understand you. I do understand you. Thank you very much. You can come back. All righty. Are there any more you want to say to us in response to our earlier questions? Are you happy that you've answered all our questions satisfactorily?
Just to go back on that point of the retail, so I think that there's an opportunity within the planning obligation to look at a mechanism. We have to be careful, you have to be careful about equalities and what we are trying to do with this particular thing. It is very much on the borderline of planning, I have to say, with what we're doing. We're talking about commercial businesses, not the unit itself, which is something that we primarily deal with in planning. So we would have to be extremely careful, and I think we'd have to look at that mechanism with yourselves, and I think there isn't a mechanism in the planning obligations that would be happy to work with officers to ensure that actually it does deliver what you want it to do. And I think my client and the applicant was very clear there. We'll do what you want us to do, but we have to do it in a legal and lawful way, and we have to do it in an equal way as well. All 6 tenants are important tenants.
Understood. We'll need to go back to the office on this one. Thank you very much for your presentation and responding to the committee's questions. Thank you very much indeed. I'll now move on to supporters who are within 100 metres of the development site. I'm not sure we have a supporter registered. There are no supporters, there's none in the room. In that case, I now move on to ward councillors. Last but not least, of course, is there a ward councillor in the room? Oh, we have one. Good evening there, good evening. Can I ask you please, Councillor, to introduce yourself to the committee, and then once you've done that, I'll indicate you can start and you have 3 minutes to make your presentation. Please introduce yourself to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. It's Dora Dixon-File. I'm one of the 3 ward councillors for Camberwell Green, which is where this development sits.
Okay. You may begin your presentation now.
Thank you, Chair, councillors, officers. First of all, I just want to make the point that I'm speaking on behalf of my fellow 2 other ward councillors, Councillors Kieran Williams and Councillors Tom Flynn. We have gone through the points I'm going to share with you tonight, and we are agreed on the points we want to make, and we agreed on the my final summary, which I'll read out to you. So the first thing to say is that Spot Properties has been, as you heard earlier, has been around for a long time, 2 decades in Camberwell Green, and some of us, myself, have been working with them for many years in trying to make Butterfly Walk more user-friendly, and if we've had problems and issues with any of the users of the centre or the owners of the shops, we've always been able to go to them and speak up on behalf of those owners of the businesses. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that we have, during all these years, always made representations on behalf of our local neighbours, and as ward councillors we've been able to challenge the Spot Properties, we've held them to account. We have, in terms of this proposal, had many meetings with them. You've heard the previous gentleman speak about the dates of some of those meetings, but we've had meetings at the Camberwell Library, we've joined in with their consultation processes in Butterfly Walk, and we've encouraged residents from the local area, particularly the Colonnades, from Daneville, etc., Kerford Place, etc., to actually join in this consultation. It is going to be a massive change. There's no 2 ways about it. But as you all know as councillors and officers, that we have a duty, we have a real need to increase the number of housing for people in this borough. Across inner London, it's an urgent priority. As councillors, as officers, you will know that a lot of the issues that we have to deal with as councillors, as officers, is to deal with people who are overcrowded. Is that it?
No,
oh, okay, sorry. Okay. So we support having a hotel, a cinema, the housing. We are very keen to have a hotel, for example, because we have Kingsbridge Hospital, we have the Morsey Hospital, we have people who come to Camberwell to look after loved ones, and they need somewhere to stay. We have got other hotels, of course, but this is really important that we have something
Your time is up.
Decent. I've got more to say.
Thank you. All right, could you turn off your microphone, Councillor, please? Questions, Councillor Livingstone.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon-File.
Excuse my back.
That's okay. You were about to say, could you complete the points that you were trying to raise?
Thank you, Councillor Livingstone. What a wonderful councillor you are. Yes, so Daneville, Kerfield Place, Allendale Close. We've had meetings and discussions with residents from SE5, Forum, etc. For me, one of the big things is about the loss of daylight. But we have to start from the premises that with a parking space just opposite and very low-rise houses, it already benefits incredibly from fantastic lighting. So although we are going to lose some lighting, and it's not something that I would personally want to see happen, but in terms of what we're going to have as a trade-off, we are still going to get lighting, and I have been to some of the premises, some of the houses at Kerfield, and I've been to visit on many years ago, but it was absolutely fantastic lighting. It's a great place, and it's a shame that we're going to have to lose that. So that is one of the big issues, and also the loss of trees. It would be great to keep some of those trees, but reading the report, we know that some of them are already badly damaged. In terms of the positive side, I would mention the hotel, etc. We've got the play space, Councillor Whittam mentioned, but it could be more. It could be closer placed than what we have here. But no planning, no redevelopment is ever going to appease every single person. There's always going to be some opposition. And what we as three councillors have done so far is to try and impact. We have made a big impact on the original planning proposal that came to us via the consultation, via listening to our constituents, and just come up with ideas of our own. And they have listened. But our work doesn't stop there, Councillor Livingstone. We're going to carry on pushing for more things. For example, we want to talk to developers after this meeting, to talk to them about having a proper transport policy to, if this is approved, we want to talk to them about how we get materials in and out. We want to make sure that we have a forum where we can actually have the developers and residents meeting together regularly. There's so much things we can do. Somebody mentioned about the cinema is not really, is a waste of space. It's not. Camberwell, our USP is about the arts. It's the arts, it's about film. I mean, we had a few years ago now, we tried to have a Camberwell Cinema Week. That never got off the ground because we didn't have the premises. In fact, our last big, if I remember correctly, our last big issue in the ward was about the bingo hall when it was sold. Some people wanted to have a cinema there. They came to the council. We couldn't afford £8 million to put a cinema there. So a cinema is really something that we as long-term residents would actually welcome having. But as I said, we can't please everybody. The other thing we want to do is to ask the developers to perhaps put a restriction on the leases of the rooftop terraces. What we don't want to see is in a few years' time, people who bought those flats to have late night parties and disturb everybody else. So that's something we'd like to ask them to consider. Yes, so as local councillors, so the Wren Roads, I think Councillor Whittam, you mentioned about Wren Road, somebody mentioned about Wren Road, Councillor. From what I understand, the hostels like Wren Road would share facilities inside, and those ones are owned by the council, the Wren Road ones. There's a possibility that we're going to be moving the people out and then doing them up to make them self-contained, or to make them into actually larger properties for family use. So that is something that we're thinking about doing, as I understand from the cabinet member.
Thank you, Councillor. Are you there?
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are there further questions for Councillor Dixon-Fowle? Further questions? Oh, Councillor Whittam.
do you see the community space being used?
Which just general community space.
No, the 22 metres.
I just think it could, I mean, it's up to the residents, honestly. We need to actually sit round and actually get people on board. At the moment, we've still got this sort of two sides. We've got the objectives and supporters, and it seems that people are not talking to each other. I just think we need to get everyone on the same page and then work out what's best for the area. Yeah.
Right here then, right here. Thank you, Councillor Whittam. Councillor Dixon-Fowl, thank you very much for your presentation and responding to committee's questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It is now from 10 to 9, and again I'm going to call for a 5 minutes break until 8:55, and we will reconvene. Right, could all members of the public please take their seats, please? We're now reached a point in of the committee's proceedings in which we are now open for debate. I would like to pursue the debate in relation to the affordable units, 6 reduced to 3, and just again point out that the only reason why it's become an issue is because it's an issue that has arisen at the last possible moment. We've had a report for some weeks now, and colleagues have spent time studying, familiarising themselves with it, but this is a change which we cannot ignore and to which we're now seeking some satisfaction, that we're satisfied that the allocation of the affordable retail space is being conducted in a sort of equitable manner. Okay. I don't know, first of all, are there any comments from committee members, first of all? Am I on the right line? Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. As I led off that questioning, it took us a while to get for the applicants and the centre managers to understand the questions we were asking. But we got to the point where we wanted to get, so I feel assured that they will work with our officers to devise a methodology that will be safe and equitable. So I am happy with the answers I've received.
Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
I do feel a little bit of sympathy for the applicant on this one. I mean, is there a protocol that they can follow? Because the answer we got from the applicant gave me the impression that perhaps he wasn't familiar with what the process is to make sure that the equities requirements are met. I mean, I don't know if there's protocol that...
Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Are there any further comments? And I might just invite the applicant or agents to make any further comments, contribution to the committee's deliberation at this point. At the moment, it's 6. Yes, come forward. Yes, go ahead.
We spoke during the interval, Chair, just about the issue, and obviously we're aware that there's quite a lot of concern from members of the committee, and obviously it did turn up late. I think in hindsight, therefore, based on the 6 named retailers that are in the committee report, we'd be happy to go with the original committee report.
Thank you very much. It makes our life much easier. Turn off your mic. Thank you very much. So that's clear. So that there's a further amendment in the amendment addendum, so we need to recall that. Are there further comments that the committee members wish to make now that we've resolved that particular issue on any other issue? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for officers. Looping back to paragraph 273, Yvonne, I believe you were responding to this earlier, and specifically provision of space for teenagers, which it looks like it's 142 square metres. And I just wanted to be clear that my understanding of this is correct when it says off-site in lieu payment. Does that mean that we have, because it's notoriously difficult to do in a hyper-dense urban area like Camberwell, have we identified suitable sites for 142 square metres of play area? Because my concern is that this could be something in a few years' time we find we've been unable to achieve that and we just lost the space.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The 142 square metres in effect gets translated into a financial payment. So it's that financial payment that gets used to augment or enhance existing play in our other parks. Just remind me of the amounts, Patrick?
£21,442.
So in normal circumstances that gets pooled because this is something we come across quite commonly on these medium-sized developments that they can't cater for the teenagers on site. So those amounts of money get pooled. There isn't a park or a project at the moment to absorb that, but as you'll know, we have many parks which can always use money for enhanced teenage play.
May I ask a follow-up question? Yes, of course. Just to clarify on that, so I understand the practicalities of it. Can we get some reassurance that that money will remain within the local area so that the teenagers who are perhaps directly affected by this can benefit from the improved and enhanced play space which will be nearby, even if not within the development?
Yes, our Section 106 has to conform with certain criteria, one of which is that any monies or benefits that are applied off-site are related to the development, both in terms of scale but also location.
So it will be in the Camberwell area.
It will be within an area that is accessible to the children from this development. I mean, I suppose the boundary with Campbell and Peckham means that it could be technically Peckham, but within an accessible location.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor White.
Councillor Whitton brought up the toilet in the community space. I mean, I don't think McDonald's would be that happy having randoms moving just to use their loo. Is it possible to have the requirement for a toilet to be installed as a Section 106? I don't know if that's even possible.
It's possible. I mean, I might have to ask Patrick to quickly find the paragraph to remind me, but we've said in the report there is no policy requirement for a community space as part of the scheme. It was something that the applicant wanted to include in their scheme, and as we've said in the report, it's very small and it has limited facilities. And therefore we're saying in the report that you as members in making your decision should give it very little weight, because it's not a benefit which we would suggest would override any problems you foresaw with the scheme. It's just something which the developer wants to provide. We could ask them to include a toilet in it. Obviously, would make the space smaller still in terms of its usable floor area, and so it's a balance. So our view is it's something which the developer wants to offer, but it's not something we would expect you to give a lot of weight to as a benefit of the overall scheme.
Thank you. And I trust you're satisfied, Councillor White. Very good. Thank you very much. Councillor Livingston.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to return to the daylight issue. I think from the various questions and things, I mean, the report clearly shows sort of big reductions for some properties at Wren Road, particularly the hostel and Kerfield Place. I think, for me, Councillor Soames asked a question as well about the hostel. That's the bit that probably concerns me most in terms of reduced daylight, not only because of vulnerability, but because of the nature of a hostel. You'd expect people might be in those rooms and not use communal rooms more often than if it was a normal house or something. So I just really want to understand what the impact would be on those. Right, you mentioned a percentage decreases, but what's the sort of, if we were trying to look at a level of residual daylight, what's the sort of quantity of that for those places in Wren Road, and just to get your observations and views on that.
Thank you, Councillor Livingston. Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Livingstone. Probably the best paragraph in the committee report to refer you to is 335, that's on page 92. It discusses the extent of the BSC percentage losses for Wren Road Hostel. As you would have seen from the slides a little bit earlier in the presentation, which I'll just flick to refresh your memories. You have these 4 windows in the kind of southern corner of the hostel that would receive those what we call substantial adverse losses of 40% or more. But as you'll remember, and as you've noted, we do also have to look at these absolute retained VSCs. And for these windows, those retained VSCs would be 16.73%, 18.52%, 19.42 and 19.89. So they're in the kind of high teens. Obviously, the BREE recommends that 27% is a good level of daylight, but it doesn't qualify that for urban areas. And you know, these kind of figures are not untypical for urban locations such as this. There have also been other quite relevant comments made here about the potential reuse of this building. Obviously, as it stands, there's a planning permission in place to subdivide this into individual dwellings. That's not implemented, so the hostel does need to be assessed and has been assessed on the assumption that it remains as such a place for vulnerable people. But in terms of those absolute retained VSCs, really when you're looking at the high teens in an urban location, those are generally good levels of daylight.
And the applicant's agent mentioned that there was an emerging policy in the London plan where the figure was 18%. Is that a figure that you recognise?
Obviously, we apply the BREE guidance, and the only real reference in the BREE guidance is 27%. There is indeed a draft out for consultation at the moment from the Mayor. There are references in it to 13% and 18% as these kind of figures between which you might expect to see daylight levels in London. but as our report sets out, really that we are applying the BRE guidance, we apply them flexibly because we're in an urban London location, but the report referred to by the planning agent is just a draft, it's in circulation at the moment. So we would really point you to the assessment that we've provided in the report. Thanks.
Essentially guidance. Are there further comments from members? One with Councillor Caldwell, or Councillor Whittam, yes, indeed.
Can I just say that there is a 90% VSE reduction on Allendale Close at number 6, on page 96 at the bottom, 112 at the top.
Yes, this window this pane is part of the conservatory. The conservatory is served by about 10 different panes of glass, and you can see from the image there that quite a few of those would not be affected at all. One would be affected to a moderate adverse extent, one to a minor adverse extent, and then this one, which is a substantial adverse impact. But that glazed pane actually looks onto a covered space. The owner of this property has put a roof on the space that glazed pane is served by, so that has significantly prohibited daylight to the glazed pane. Its starting value is 1.88% VSC, which is extremely close to zero, so it's essentially not receiving very much light at all. And then the development, what happens when you have very low absolute retained VSCs to begin with, any change at all to that will produce a significant percentage loss, so that's why you see something as high as 90%. But in terms of the absolute retained VSC, you're going from 1.88% in the current situation to 0.19% in the proposed situation. Materially, in terms of how someone experiences the light coming through that window, there would be really, I think it's fair to say there would be no change. Essentially, it's receiving almost no light at the current time, and it will continue to receive no light in the proposed future scenario.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Whittam, for those questions. I think I'm now, unless there are further comments that members wish to make, I think we just quickly need to review on what has happened this meeting in terms of the changes made to the report and addendum received thus far. So just to be clear, as regards the addendum, we get the addendum, and in looking at reviewing the paragraph, prior to considering a motion, if I can find the relevant paragraph, it would be nice, wouldn't it? So we go, of course, 16 through to 18. So the applicant has agreed that all 6 affordable retail space will now be available. It will not be reduced to 3, so that's a change to be noted. And I believe that's the only other change that should be noted as a result of this meeting. Agreed? Agreed. Okay, good. In that case then, if you're so minded, I'll move to a motion. Very good. Now, there are amended conditions arising from the addendum report, or indeed the members' debate, that these are agreed by committee. So therefore, I'd like to move that we adopt the officer's recommendations set out in paragraph 1 of the report and on pages 19 of the main agenda pack. That full planning permission be granted for application 19AP 7057, subject to conditions, referral to the Mayor of London, and the applicant enter into a satisfactory legal agreement. That in the event that the legal agreement is not entered into by the 28th of January 2022, the Director of Planning and Growth be authorised to refuse planning permission if appropriate for the reasons set out in paragraph 583 of this report. So that's the motion I propose. Is there a seconder? Seconder. In that case, then, members, I'll now go through as follows. We'll now move to the vote. I'll call on vote members of this committee by name and ask them to confirm that they vote in favour or against this motion or wish to abstain. I'll begin with Councillor Whittam. Are you for, against, or abstain the motion? Against. Councillor James Caldwell, for, against, or abstain the motion.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Livingstone, for, against, or abstain the motion.
For.
Councillor Damon O'Brien, for, against, or abstain the motion.
For.
Councillor Cleo Soames, for, against, or abstain the motion.
Against.
Councillor Nick Johnson, for, against, or abstain the motion.
For.
Councillor Bill Williams, for, against, or abstain the motion. And I'm Councillor Martin Seaton, and I'm for the motion. The motion is therefore carried. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. And have a good evening, everyone. I definitely do not need to take home all this paper.